everyone for joining us in a conversation today. I'm very pleased to be able to be joined today by Arjun Makhijani, President of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research, and a new senior fellow here at Just Solutions. And I'm excited to join in this conversation. I'm Aiko Schaefer. I'm the Executive Director of Just Solutions. So great to have this time together, Arjun. You and I talk quite often, and so this is a little bit of a recording of our conversation about your recent essay, and the first in our series of just essays, and yours titled Reflections on the Atomic Destruction of Hiroshima and the Present Nuclear Resurgence. So excited to have this conversation with you. So Arjun, you wrote this first essay. Why this topic? Why is it important to you?
Well, the atomic destruction of Hiroshima changed the world, brought a whole new world, which we haven't really finished assessing yet. Some of the big questions are hardly even asked. So the bomb project, as people know, was suggested by Einstein and Leo Szilard and others because they were afraid of Nazi monopoly and Nazi blackmail. So Nazis would get the bomb first. The scenario was everybody would be enslaved to the Nazis. Nobody wanted to be enslaved to the Nazis. Very reasonable. Do a bomb project, get there first. But to my knowledge, the question of what would happen if the US had a bomb monopoly was not posed then. And I don't think has been seriously examined since. Because the US did, in fact, have a monopoly at the end of World War II. What did it do with it? Was there thinking that the US should have a monopoly? What would it do with the monopoly? Was there some thinking beforehand, or was it kind of improvisation afterward? So, and how has it shaped our world where we are today? We seem to be closer to nuclear destruction, according to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, than ever since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. How did that happen? The Cold War ended more than 30 years ago. Why are we at the brink? And is it connected to nuclear power in some way, or did nuclear power arise out of the bomb, not just technologically, but politically? So all of these questions, it was very fascinating that you invited me to reflect on this, and it kind of brought together 40 years of work and research in this. So it was a real pleasure to write this. Lots of questions.
Lots of things that you covered in your essay. And, as much as you enjoyed it, that I was being selfish as well. My mother was in Japan during World War II. I've talked about that. I didn't get a chance to, she doesn't talk very much about that experience. I've heard some stories. And so I've always appreciated talking with you and learning the history that you have. As a child growing up and hearing about World War II and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was always a tough thing to learn about. I think you and I talked about, we didn't really hear the full story, which I think you began to disclose and share in your essay. But it's a part of our history that I don't think we talk as much about. The survivors are aging and passing away. So I do personally appreciate the work that you've done on this topic and the opportunity to read your essay and to continue to learn about my culture, my family history a little bit more, although not in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, nonetheless in Japan. And so can you talk to us a little bit more about the history? Your essay covers the history. You cover a little bit about why we chose Japan out of all the countries that could have been chosen. Give us a little insight into your essay and what you cover in that regard.
It was supposed to be about Germany till the end, till the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or till the war ended against Germany in May 1945. The scientists believed the whole project was about Germany, but the decision not to target Germany. So I said, it was a two-part. The targeting was a two-part decision. Yes, Japan, and not Germany. So there was an affirmative decision to not target Germany in 1943. And at least according to the minutes, it was a purely technical decision. Germany knows a lot about nuclear science. If the bomb is a dud, they could reverse engineer and use it on the British, presumably. And actually, at the time, Tokyo was considered as a target and not targeted. If the bomb was a dud, a fleet would be targeted, it would sink. It was a purely technical decision. The same decision had been made about the proximity fuse, the first smart bomb that was invented in just before around 1941. And but the fascinating thing is that General Groves, who was the executive director of the Manhattan Project and from the Army Corps of Engineers, that the target is and was always expected to be Japan. Even though the project was about Germany, even Oppenheimer did not know that. And so who held this secret so close? And there were two scientists who have almost passed into obscurity, even though they were in the center of the scientific decisions, not the making of the bomb, but the decisions about making the bomb. And so, and that scientist was Vannevar Bush. He wanted the United States to have the scientific ability to rule the world. And he said that in 1940, before the United States. And so when the US got the monopoly, it became operationally possible to have a kind of an atomic tipped coercion of the world to tell everybody basically where to get off. Oh, that's what the Americans thought. Now they knew that Soviets would get the bomb soon, or, within a few years, there was some argument. They were aware that it could be a race to annihilation. But despite that, they went ahead. They didn't end the project when Germany was defeated, or when they knew, the Einsteins of the world thought, this is about it. So when Germany was defeated, the project should have ended. But it didn't, because part of the idea was not that. Part of the idea it was about Germany, but part of the idea was total control. And that's what took over when Germany was defeated. That's why Einstein said it was his biggest mistake.
And in your essay, you also not only provide this great history and arc of how we got to where we did in terms of dropping the bombs in Japan, but you also begin to carve a path towards nuclear energy. Tell us a little bit more about that connection. I mean, what is that connection between the A-bomb into nuclear energy and subsequently where we are today?
Yeah, so of course, to make the plutonium for the Nagasaki bomb, they had to build nuclear reactors. So they had to produce nuclear energy to convert the uranium into plutonium. So there was talk about nuclear energy, even during the Manhattan Project and certainly after it, but it was generally recognized to be extremely expensive. I quoted the research director of General Electric, who said, basically, this is going to be very expensive, and this is a paraphrase, that it's going to remain expensive for a very long time to come. And we're still there. 80 years later, it's still extremely expensive, even according to Wall Street, which in the mid-1980s called nuclear power the biggest managerial disaster in business history, or something to that effect, in the United States. So was there such an investment in nuclear power? And it turns out nuclear power was basically a fig leaf on the horror of the hydrogen bomb. The United States had one, the Soviets were developing one, 1,000 times Hiroshima. Hiroshima was already 1,000 times the kinds of bombing that were routinely done. So we're talking 1,000,000 times the kind of bombing that was done of cities in World War II. And it's kind of almost like unimaginable, even for a technical person like me. And after the 1954 test at Bikini on March 1st, there was fallout all over the world. It was intense. Japanese fishermen got sick. The tuna were contaminated. Rongelap was irradiated with near lethal levels of radiation. It was global publicity, and people started thinking, Eisenhower said basically people think we're warmongers and saber rattlers, so do something, And the do something was, according to Commissioner Murray, he was an atomic energy commissioner, that we should do a Christian thing and offer the Japanese a nuclear reactor so they'll forget about. So it was really It wasn't sensible. It wasn't economical. It was designed as a propaganda idea to kind of bury the horror of thermonuclear weapons and announce to the world that atoms for peace, including Japan. That's how Japan got started on nuclear energy, which wound up, of course, in Fukushima accident, and all the nuclear power plants were shut down in the year after that. Some have been restarted. And even today, everybody thinks nuclear power is now essential for climate change, and the nuclear power is now, I would say, maybe 10 times as expensive as wind and solar on a utility scale. It's not needed at all. I've spent years doing technical analyses of these questions, but there are, I would say, devotees of nuclear power, because the idea that we need nuclear power for decarbonization is not really rational from an engineering point of view. I'm sorry to say that, but
Yeah. Well, and I encourage people to check out our podcasts. Arjun and I have had a conversation about nuclear energy on the podcast where we go a lot deeper around that technology and the shortcomings and challenges of that. So, Arjun, what are the lessons learned when you look at the history around nuclear weaponry and nuclear energy? I mean, what are the things that we should be taking away from what has happened?
there are a couple. The two accomplishments of nuclear disarmament that are robust and that are still standing up are the Atmospheric Test Ban Treaty that was motivated by strontium-90 in babies' teeth and basically poisoning our babies. And that is robust. I don't think there will be atmospheric testing, at least by the major powers. Even the new nuclear weapon states like North Korea, India, and Pakistan, they did underground testing. The the other lesson I have is from 1991 as the Soviet Union was falling apart. There wasn't time, the treaties haven't been robust. Major powers tend to break treaties at convenience. And the United States, of course, has historically been a champion of that, as indigenous people know. Uh, but the but the thing that is, I think, is still robust and will remain so is as the Soviet Union was falling apart in mid 1991, Gorbachev and Bush talked. Actually, it wasn't known that they had talked. Bush suddenly announced that we're going to dismantle all of the new tactical nuclear weapons that are deployed on ships, aircraft carriers, in the field to fight a war in Europe. 7,000 of them just in Europe. They withdrew them and dismantled them, and then Gorbachev did the same. And tens of thousands of nuclear weapons were dismantled. We still have the plutonium, but the weapons are dismantled. That is an accomplishment that was done unilaterally. The US said, we're going to do this. They didn't say the Russians have to do it or we won't do it. They didn't say that. They just did it. And I think we should be doing the same today. We should be pushing for the same. We should be pushing the parties that have nuclear weapons to just agree that nuclear abolition is a good thing and sit down with the parties that created the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. There is a treaty like that says nuclear weapons are horrible, illegal, and immoral, and figure it out. Not commit to it, but just say, we like this, let's figure it out. And the other thing is is a nuclear ceasefire. So we're in the middle, sitting on the edge of a nuclear void. We should declare a nuclear ceasefire. Kind of not be on hair trigger alert and say we're not going to use them first. And for nuclear power, I would say the idea that it's an inalienable right, which is in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, is very bizarre. Not an inalienable right to energy or food or housing, but an inalienable right. The global South got hornswoggled by Atoms for Peace. They all wanted, they thought modernization, the ultimate symbol of technological sophistication. It's just a way to boil water. Nuclear energy is just a way to boil water. We're making plutonium just to boil water. If it were cheap, it might be a question, but it's expensive. It's an expensive way to boil water and make plutonium and give it to your kids. So we should just wake up and say, you can keep the inalienable right, but you don't have to exercise it. So that's my message.
That's wonderful, Arjun. And you had this chance to write this essay, our very first just essay by our senior fellow, our newest senior fellow being you. I mean, what did it mean for you to be able to write about this topic in the context of where we're at today?
Well, practically, I've wanted to write a book about this for a long time. I've got two manuscripts in my computer. So it forced me to condense a large part of those manuscripts into 9 pages, and I'm glad that it's done. And and what it meant for me is I had never thought through how to join the nuclear power, nuclear weapons question in an organic, integral way that would make historical and factual sense. And also the question of what do we do now? We're not going to have treaties anytime soon, and the parties to these treaties aren't really going to trust each other very much. So I think the idea that we should be inspired by what Gorbachev and Bush did and push the nuclear weapon states, all of us, here we live in the United States, I think Russians, the Chinese, we should push them to act unilaterally to do these two things, sit down with the parties to the treaty and just declare a nuclear ceasefire.
Yeah.
I think it's meant a lot to me to figure out what can I recommend, knowing the history as much as I do, that practically we could advocate that could be done and that would be reasonably robust,
Well,
make us safer.
yeah, and it was such a great essay to get to read. I hope people check out our Just Essays. It's really an opportunity for our senior fellows to put out their thoughts about current issues, historic issues for us to consider, and for us to really put forward the concept of a radical imagination. What could we do? How can we dream bigger? How can we think practically to get to those dreams? And so I really enjoyed reading your piece, Arjun, and the historic elements are always so thoughtful and so relevant to me personally, but also to the current conversations that we're having around nuclear.
Yeah, if I might say so before you close, Aiko, a large part of this was inspired when you say I want essays to be inspired by a radical imagination. That was the key to this essay.
Yeah. And I think it's important, right? I think we're in this time where we're always trying to be almost too practical, right? What can we do now? What's doable, what's fundable. And I think there's really a place for us to hear from you and others who have worked in a field for so long to just put forward those bigger, brighter ideas, and then we can figure out how we get there. So definitely check out the Just Solutions essay or Just Essay by Arjun. And also, we're so pleased that you have joined us as a senior fellow. And I encourage everyone to learn about our other senior fellows, look for their essays. The program has been really just a great part of what we're doing here at Just Solutions to be able to give an opportunity for those individuals who spent a long career, fruitful career on policy design, execution, advocacy, to have time here at Just Solutions to be able to focus on different concepts, different solutions, have some radical imagination, as well as provide technical assistance and support to communities on the ground. So definitely check that out. If anyone happens to have $1 million lying around and want to help fund that program, let us know. It's a fabulous effort to be able to support their leadership and obviously for us to have that wealth of historic knowledge that we can keep drawing from. So thank you, Arjun, for being part of
Thank
this
you.
conversation.
Worth $1 million any day of the week.